The neighborhood's most vindictive HOA president stood at Marcus's fence line, her manicured finger jabbing toward his half-built pool. "People like you don't deserve luxuries," Karen sneered, her voice dripping with venom. But when the scorching heatwave hit 3 weeks later, and her own central air failed catastrophically, she'd find herself on his doorstep, not demanding this time, but desperately begging. The tables were about to turn in the most satisfying way possible, and Marcus was about to discover that karma has a wicked sense of timing. Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the construction site that was slowly becoming his dream pool. The rectangular hole in his backyard, lined with steel rebar and ready for concrete, represented 2 years of overtime shifts at the manufacturing plant and countless nights of side jobs. Every dollar had been earned, through calloused hands and an aching back. "Excuse me." The sharp voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Marcus turned to see Karen Whitmore marching across his lawn, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the sunlight, her designer yoga outfit pristine despite the humid July morning. Behind her trailed 2 other women from the Willowbrook Estates, Homeowners Association, her faithful disciples who hung on her every word. "Ms. Whitmore," Marcus nodded politely, though his jaw tightened. As the HOA president, Karen had made his life difficult from the moment he'd moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago. First, it was the color of his mailbox, then his garden. Gnomes were inappropriate lawn decorations. Every week brought a new violation notice, each one more petty than the last. "What is this?" Karen gestured dramatically at the construction site, her voice pitched high enough to alert the entire cul-de-sac. "You didn't get HOA approval for this eyesore." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling to his email. "I submitted the pool application 3 months ago. I have the approval right here." "That was a mistake," Karen interrupted, her green eyes flashing with malice. "The board is reconsidering. This kind of ostentatious display doesn't belong in our community." "Ostentatious?" Marcus's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched at his sides. "It's a pool. Half the neighborhood has pools. Those families have been here for years. They've earned their place." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper, but her words carried the weight of poison. "People like you don't deserve luxuries like this. You should be grateful you're even allowed to live here." The racial undertone hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt his blood pressure spike, but he'd learned long ago that losing his temper with people like Karen only gave them ammunition. "I bought this house same as everyone else. I pay my HOA fees. I follow the rules." "Rules change," Karen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Especially when certain elements move in and try to upgrade their station beyond what's appropriate. Marcus's neighbor, Bill Henderson, had been watering his roses nearby. The 70-year-old retired teacher shut off his hose and walked over. His weathered face creased with disgust. "Karen, that's enough. The man has every right to build a pool on his own property." "Bill, this doesn't concern you," Karen snapped, but her confidence wavered slightly. Bill had lived in Willowbrook longer than anyone, and his opinion carried weight. "It concerns me when you're harassing my neighbor with your thinly veiled racism," Bill replied, his voice calm but firm. "Marcus, you keep building. Some of us are looking forward to pool parties." Karen's face flushed red. "This isn't over. Rodriguez, not by a long shot." She spun on her designer sneakers and stalked back across the lawn, her entourage scurrying behind her. Marcus watched her go, then turned to Bill. "Thanks for that. Don't mention it. Woman's been a menace since she moved here 5 years ago. Thinks she owns the place." Bill glanced at the pool construction. "When you expecting to have this beauty finished?" 2 more weeks if the weather holds." Marcus managed to smile. "You're welcome anytime, Bill. Your grandkids, too." As Bill headed back to his roses, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his pool contractor. "Permit office called. Someone filed a complaint about our work. They want to inspect everything again. Might delay completion." Marcus stared at the message, then looked across the street where Karen stood in her front window, watching him with a satisfied smirk. She raised her coffee mug in a mock toast before disappearing behind her pristine white curtains. That evening, Marcus sat on his back porch, nursing a beer and staring at the half-finished pool. His girlfriend, Elena, arrived from her nursing shift at the hospital, still in her scrubs. "Rough day?" she asked, settling beside him on the porch swing. Karen struck again. Marcus filled her in on the morning's encounter and the subsequent permit issues. Elena's expression darkened as he spoke. "That woman needs to be stopped," Elena said, her voice tight with anger. "She can't keep getting away with this." "What am I supposed to do? She's got half the HOA board in her pocket, and the other half is too scared to cross her." Marcus took a long sip of his beer. "Maybe I should just fill in the hole and forget about it." "Don't you dare." Elena's hand found his. "This is your dream, Marcus. You've worked too hard to let some bitter woman steal it from you." Marcus nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. Karen Whitmore had power in this neighborhood, and she clearly intended to use every bit of it to make his life miserable. What he didn't know was that karma was already setting the stage for the most poetic justice imaginable. 3 streets over, in the mechanical room of Karen's pristine colonial house, a 20-year-old air conditioning unit hummed with increasing strain. The maintenance Karen had been putting off for months was finally catching up with her. A small, coolant leak had been growing steadily worse, and the compressor was working overtime to compensate. The weather forecast called for a record-breaking heat wave starting the following week, 7 straight days of temperatures above 100 degrees. And Karen's air conditioning unit, pushed beyond its limits by years of neglect and the mounting pressure of the approaching heat, was about to fail in the most spectacular way possible. But tonight, as Marcus stared at his unfinished pool and Karen celebrated her small victory with a glass of expensive wine, neither of them could have predicted how dramatically their positions would reverse in just a matter of days. The construction crew arrived the next morning despite the permit delay, and Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for the bureaucratic mess to resolve itself, he was going to finish his pool. Karen Whitmore wanted a war? She was about to get one. The concrete trucks arrived at dawn on Tuesday, their massive mixers rumbling through the quiet streets of Willowbrook Estates. Marcus had called in every favor he had to keep the project moving forward, even paying extra to expedite the pour, before Karen could file another complaint. "You sure about this?" asked Tony Vega, the pool contractor, as his crew prepared the hoses. "That HOA lady seemed pretty serious about shutting us down." "I'm sure," Marcus replied, watching Karen's house across the street. Her curtains twitched, and he could see her silhouette pacing behind the window. "Let's finish this." The concrete flowed like gray water, filling the rectangular void that had dominated Marcus's backyard for weeks. Each truckload brought him closer to his dream and further from Karen's reach. Once the concrete was poured, she'd have a much harder time stopping the project. By noon, the pool shell was complete. The crew began laying the plumbing lines while Marcus stood back, admiring their progress. The satisfaction was short-lived. "Rodriguez!" Karen's voice shrieked across the yard. She stormed through his gate, her face flushed with rage, clutching a manila folder. "You are in direct violation of HOA regulations and city ordinances." Marcus turned slowly, his patience finally wearing thin. "The concrete's poured, Karen. It's done." "Nothing's done until I say it's done." She thrust the folder at him. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight, 7 o'clock. Your little project is going to be voted down, and you're going to tear out every bit of this concrete." Marcus glanced at the papers, a hastily assembled packet of bylaws and regulations, most of which he'd never seen before. These weren't in the original HOA documents. They are now. The board voted on amendments yesterday. Karen's smile was predatory. Amendments that specifically address new residents who think they can do whatever they want. Yesterday? You can't change rules overnight and apply them retroactively. Watch me. Karen turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rodriguez? You might want to enjoy your little mud puddle while you can. After tonight, you'll be filling it with dirt." As Karen strutted away, Tony shook his head. "That woman's got it out for you, brother. What did you do to piss her off? Existed, Marcus muttered, staring at the legal documents. His phone buzzed, a text from Elena. Covering extra shift tonight. Can't make HOA meeting. Sorry, babe. Marcus felt the walls closing in. Elena was his strongest supporter. Bill was out of town visiting his daughter, and he'd be facing Karen's kangaroo court alone. That afternoon, the heat began to build. The Weather Service issued an excessive heat warning for the entire region. 7 days of temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, with heat indices reaching 110. The first day would hit Thursday. Inside Karen's house, her ancient air conditioning unit wheezed and struggled. The coolant leak had worsened overnight, and the system was working at maximum capacity just to maintain 78 degrees. Karen, focused entirely on her upcoming victory over Marcus, didn't notice the subtle changes, the way the unit cycled more frequently, the slightly warmer air coming from the vents, the unusual sounds coming from the mechanical room. At 7 o'clock sharp, Marcus walked into the community center meeting room. 12 residents sat around a conference table, with Karen presiding from the head like a queen holding court. The air conditioning hummed efficiently, keeping the room comfortably cool despite the 85-degree evening temperature outside. "Let's get straight to business," Karen announced, her voice carrying an edge of triumph. "We're here to discuss the unauthorized construction at 1247 Maple Drive." Marcus remained standing. "The construction was authorized. I have the permits." "Permits that were issued in error," Karen replied smoothly, "and superseded by new regulations." She gestured to board member Patricia Mills, a nervous woman in her 60s who clearly didn't want to be there. The board voted yesterday to implement new guidelines for, pool construction," Patricia stammered, avoiding Marcus's eyes. "All new pools must be approved by a 2/3 majority vote, and we don't have 2/3 approval," Karen finished. "In fact, we have a motion to require removal of the existing construction. All in favor?" 5 hands went up, Karen's inner circle, as expected. Marcus looked around the table at the faces of his neighbors. Some looked uncomfortable, others avoided his gaze entirely. "Motion carries," Karen announced. "Mr. Rodriguez, you have 30 days to remove the concrete and restore your yard to its original condition or face daily fines of $500. Marcus felt his world tilt. 2 years of savings, months of planning, weeks of construction, all of it threatened by a woman who couldn't stand to see him succeed. "This is illegal. You can't retroactively change regulations." "Take it up with your lawyer," Karen said dismissively. Meeting adjourned. As the room emptied, Marcus found himself alone with his defeat. Outside, the temperature continued to climb, and weather forecasters updated their predictions. The heat wave would be worse than expected. The first day would break records. Meanwhile, 3 miles away at the city permit office, a young clerk named David Chen was working late, reviewing complaint files. Karen's harassment campaign had triggered a full investigation into the Willowbrook HOA's practices. What David discovered in the files would have made Marcus smile if he'd known about it. The HOA had no legal authority to change regulations retroactively. Their new bylaws were invalid, their emergency meeting violated state sunshine laws, and their threat of fines constituted harassment. David made notes in Marcus's file and scheduled a site visit for Thursday morning. But Marcus didn't know about David Chen's investigation. As he drove home through the sweltering night, he felt utterly defeated. Karen had won, and his dream lay in ruins. He pulled into his driveway and sat in his car, staring at the concrete shell of his pool. Tomorrow, he'd have to call contractors to get quotes for demolition. The thought made him sick. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Saw what happened at the meeting. Some of us neighbors aren't happy about Karen's tactics. Don't give up yet. A friend." Marcus stared at the message, feeling a tiny spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Inside her house, Karen poured herself a glass of champagne to celebrate her victory. The air conditioning cycled on again, running longer than usual, but she was too focused on her triumph to notice. Outside, the temperature reached 88 degrees, unusual for 10 p.m., and a harbinger of the brutal heat to come. At 2:17 a.m., Karen's air conditioning unit gave its final rattling gasp and died completely. The house began to heat up immediately, but Karen, exhausted from her day of warfare, slept deeply through the night. She had no idea that her weapon of choice, the sweltering heat that made pool ownership so desirable, was about to become her greatest enemy. Thursday morning arrived like a furnace door swinging open. By 7 a.m., the temperature had already climbed to 89 degrees, and the sun blazed mercilessly in a cloudless sky. The heat wave had begun with unprecedented fury. Karen woke up drenched, in sweat, her silk pajamas clinging to her skin. Something was wrong. Her house felt like an oven, the air thick and stifling. She stumbled to the thermostat, squinting at the display. 87 degrees inside, and climbing. What the hell? She jabbed at the controls, turning the temperature setting down to 65. Nothing happened. The display showed the system was off, completely unresponsive. Panic crept into her voice as she called the HVAC repair service. This is Karen Whitmore on Elm Street. My air conditioning isn't working, and I need someone here immediately. Ma'am, we're booked solid for the next week, the dispatcher replied apologetically. This heat wave has everyone's units failing. We can put you on the emergency list, but it'll be at least 5 days, maybe more. 5 days? Karen's voice rose to a shriek. Do you know who I am? I'm the HOA president. I can't wait 5 days. I'm sorry, ma'am. That's the best we can do. Karen slammed down the phone and rushed to her bedroom window, throwing it open, for relief. Instead of cool air, a wall of heat poured in like molten metal. The temperature was already 95 degrees and rising fast. Across the street, Marcus was having the morning of his life. He'd woken early to test his pool's filtration system, and despite the legal threats hanging over him, he couldn't help but smile as crystal-clear water circulated through the pristine concrete shell. The timing was perfect. His pool was ready, just as the heat wave arrived. Morning, Marcus, Bill Henderson called out, having returned from his trip the night before. The elderly man looked wilted already, his shirt soaked with perspiration. Mind if I stick my feet in that beautiful pool of yours? Come on over, Marcus replied, genuinely happy to see his friend. Water's perfect. As Bill lowered his feet into the cool water with a sigh of relief, Marcus's phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Mr. Rodriguez, this is David Chen from the city permit office. I've been reviewing your case and I have some good news. Could I stop by this morning? 20 minutes later, David Chen stood in Marcus's backyard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the early hour. He was a serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase full of documents. Mr. Rodriguez, I've completed my investigation into the HOA's actions regarding your pool, David said, pulling out a thick folder. I'm here to inform you that their emergency meeting was completely illegal. They violated state sunshine laws, their retroactive bylaws have no legal standing, and their threat of fines constitutes harassment under municipal code. Marcus felt his heart leap. What does that mean? It means your pool construction is completely legal and approved. The HOA has no authority to make you remove it. David handed him an official document. This is a cease and desist order for the HOA. If they continue to harass you, they'll face serious legal consequences. Bill cheered from the pool's edge, splashing water with his feet. Justice served! As David left, promising to deliver copies of the order to Karen personally, Marcus felt vindicated. But the real show was just beginning. By 10 a.m., the temperature hit 101 degrees. Karen's house had become unbearable. She'd tried every fan she owned, opened every window, and even sat in her car with the air conditioning running. But nothing provided lasting relief. Her makeup had melted off, her hair hung limp with sweat, and her designer clothes were soaked through. She called every HVAC company in the tri-state area. The story was the same everywhere. No availability for at least a week, emergency rates starting at $500 just for a diagnosis, and parts backordered due to the heat wave. From her living room window, Karen watched in growing desperation as Marcus's backyard transformed into a paradise. Neighbors she'd never seen before were stopping by, families with children, elderly residents seeking relief, even some of the HOA board members who'd voted against him the night before. Patricia Mills knocked on Marcus's gate around noon, looking sheepish and overheated. "Marcus, I wanted to apologize for last night. Karen pressured us and, well, I heard the city said your pool is legal." "That's right," Marcus replied, holding up David Chen's document. "Completely legal and approved." Patricia's eyes darted toward Karen's house, then back to the inviting blue water. Could I possibly... "Come on in," Marcus said warmly. "Water's perfect." As Patricia gratefully slipped her feet into the cool water, Karen watched from her scorching house with growing horror. Her carefully orchestrated campaign was crumbling, and her own desperation was mounting by the hour. The temperature reached 105 degrees by 2 p.m. Karen's house was an inferno. The inside temperature had climbed to 95 degrees and showed no signs of stopping. She'd consumed every cold drink in her refrigerator, taken 3 cold showers, and was now sitting on her bathroom floor with wet towels draped over her body. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter in college. "Mom, saw the weather alert. Hope your AC is working. Stay cool." Karen stared at the message and felt tears of frustration mixing with the sweat streaming down her face. Through her bathroom window, she could hear the sounds of laughter and splashing from Marcus's backyard. The pool she'd tried so hard to destroy had become the neighborhood's salvation, while she suffered alone in her self-made hell. At 3 p.m., David Chen knocked on Karen's door. She answered looking like she'd been through a hurricane, hair disheveled, clothes wringing wet, face flushed red with heat exhaustion. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm David Chen from the city permit office. I have some documents for you regarding your HOA's recent actions." Karen barely registered his words as he handed her the cease and desist order and explained the legal violations. All she could focus on was the blessed air conditioning running in his city vehicle, parked right behind him. "The city takes harassment of property owners very seriously," David continued. "Any further interference with Mr. Rodriguez's pool will result in personal fines for you and potential criminal charges against the HOA." As David drove away in his mercifully cool car, Karen stood in her doorway, staring at the legal documents that destroyed her last hope of victory. The irony was devastating. She'd used every weapon in her arsenal to prevent Marcus from having a pool, and now that same pool was the only source of relief in a neighborhood burning under record heat. By 4 p.m., the temperature hit 107 degrees, and Karen's house had become uninhabitable. She sat in her car again, engine running, air conditioning blasting, but she couldn't stay there forever. The gas gauge was dropping, and she was already on her second tank of the day. Through her windshield, she watched Marcus hosting what looked like a block party. Families she'd never bothered to learn the names of were laughing and cooling off in his pool. Children were splashing happily while their parents sat in the shade of umbrellas Marcus had set up around the deck. And there, in the center of it all, was the man she'd tried to destroy, graciously welcoming everyone who sought refuge from the brutal heat. Karen's pride warred with her desperation as the air conditioning in her car struggled against the overwhelming heat. She had maybe an hour before the engine overheated, and then she'd have nowhere left to run. The thought that had been growing in the back of her mind all day finally crystallized into stark, humiliating reality. She was going to have to ask Marcus Rodriguez for help. By 5 p.m., the temperature soared to 109 degrees, a new record that shattered the previous high by 4 degrees. Karen's car had become her prison, the engine straining against the heat while she sat trapped between her pride and her survival instincts. She watched through the windshield as more neighbors arrived at Marcus's backyard oasis. Even the Hendersons from 2 streets over had shown up with their grandchildren, who squealed with delight as they jumped into the crystal-clear water. The scene looked like a commercial for perfect summer living, while Karen slowly baked in, her metal cage. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from other residents asking about emergency cooling centers, expressing concern about elderly neighbors, and, most galling of all, praising Marcus for opening his pool to everyone. The neighborhood's WhatsApp group, which she'd once used to rally support against Marcus, now buzzed with grateful messages about his generosity. "Marcus is a lifesaver! Thank God for that pool. We should have welcomed him better from the ice." "Start!" Each message felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Karen had spent months poisoning the neighborhood against Marcus, and now he was being hailed as a hero. Her car's temperature gauge crept into the red zone. The engine was overheating, and she could smell burning coolant. She had minutes before. The car became as useless as her house. Through the heat shimmer rising from the asphalt, Karen saw Elena arrive home from her hospital shift. Even from a distance, the exhausted nurse looked wilted from the brutal heat. Marcus immediately guided her to a shaded chair and brought her a cold drink, his attentiveness obvious even from Karen's vantage point across the street. The engine made a grinding sound, and steam began rising from under the hood. Karen turned off the car, and the last bastion of cool air disappeared instantly. The interior temperature spiked within seconds, turning the vehicle into a furnace. She had no choice left. Karen stumbled out of the car, the superheated air hitting her like a physical blow. Her legs, weakened by hours of heat exposure and dehydration, nearly buckled. She steadied herself against the car door and looked across the street at Marcus's yard, where at least 20 people were enjoying relief from the merciless heat. The walk across the street felt like crossing a desert. Each step on the scorching asphalt sent waves of heat through her shoes. Sweat poured down her face, her vision blurred, and she could feel her body shutting down from heat exhaustion. Marcus noticed her first. He was laughing at something Bill Henderson had said when his expression changed. Even after everything Karen had done to him, seeing another human being in distress triggered his instincts. He stood up, concern replacing the joy on his face. "Elena," he called to his girlfriend who was cooling her feet in the pool. "Medical emergency." Elena looked up and immediately saw Karen swaying dangerously near the gate. Her nursing training kicked in despite her own exhaustion. "Get her in the shade now. She's showing signs of severe heat exhaustion." The entire backyard fell silent as Marcus hurried to Karen's side. She was mumbling incoherently, her skin flushed and dry. The sweating had stopped, which Elena knew was a dangerous sign. "Karen," Marcus said gently, taking her arm to steady her. "Are you okay?" Karen tried to speak, but only croaking sounds emerged from her parched throat. Her legs gave out, and Marcus caught her before she hit the ground. The woman who had tormented him for months was now completely helpless in his arms. "Bring her." "Over here," Elena commanded, clearing a spot in the shade. "We need to cool her down immediately." Marcus half-carried Karen to the poolside chairs, while Elena grabbed towels and soaked them in the cool pool water. The other neighbors watched in stunned silence as the neighborhood's most vindictive resident was gently lowered into a chair. "Karen, can you hear me?" Elena asked, pressing a cool towel to Karen's forehead. "You're suffering from heat exhaustion. We need to get your body temperature down." Karen's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Elena's concerned face, then shifting to Marcus, who was holding a glass of ice water to her lips. The irony wasn't lost on her. The two people she'd been most cruel to were now saving her life. "Drink slowly," Marcus said, his voice free of any malice or satisfaction. "Small sips." As the cold water touched her lips, Karen felt her body responding desperately to the relief. Her throat was so dry it hurt to swallow, but each sip brought her back from the edge of collapse. My house," she whispered between sips. "Air conditioning broke." "When?" Elena asked, checking Karen's pulse. "Last night, can't get repair." Karen's voice cracked with exhaustion and humiliation. "Everywhere booked." Bill Henderson shook his head sympathetically. "This heat's got everyone's units failing. Poor woman's been suffering all day." The gathered neighbors murmured with concern and understanding. These were the same people Karen had manipulated against Marcus, but faced with genuine human suffering, their compassion overrode past grievances. "You can't go back to that house," Elena said firmly. "Not in this heat. You could die." Karen closed her eyes, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. She was completely at the mercy of the man she'd tried to destroy, surrounded by neighbors she'd alienated with nowhere else to turn. The heat had stripped away all her pretenses and defenses, leaving her as vulnerable as a child. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of complete surrender. I have nowhere else to go." Marcus looked at Elena, who nodded slightly. Then he looked around at the neighbors who had gathered in his backyard, many of whom Karen had hurt with her petty tyranny over the years. Their faces showed the same compassion that had brought them all together in this moment of crisis. "You can stay," Marcus said simply, "as long as you need to." Karen's composure finally cracked. Years of carefully maintained superiority crumbled as tears mixed with the sweat on her cheeks. She'd spent months trying to take away Marcus's joy, his dream, his place in the community. And now, when she was at her most desperate, he was offering her exactly what she'd tried to deny him: sanctuary. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "After everything I did to you, why would you help me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the children playing safely in his pool while their parents relaxed in the shade. "Because that's what neighbors do," he said finally. "They help each other." The simple truth of his words hit Karen like a thunderbolt. This was what she'd been fighting against, not a man building a pool, but a man building community. And in her desperate need to maintain control and superiority, she'd lost sight of what really mattered. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, still blazing at 106 degrees, Karen sat in the shade of Marcus's umbrella, slowly recovering from her brush with heat stroke. Around her, the neighborhood that had once feared her now celebrated, the man she'd tried to destroy. But the heat wave was far from over, and Karen's ordeal was just beginning. She would spend the next several days dependent on Marcus's kindness, watching him demonstrate the very qualities she'd convinced herself he didn't possess while confronting the ugly truth about who she'd become. Friday morning brought no relief. The temperature climbed to 111 degrees by 9 a.m., and the heat wave showed no signs of breaking. Karen woke up on Marcus's couch. He'd insisted she stay the night after Elena determined she was too dehydrated to be left alone, to the sound of children's laughter echoing from the backyard. She sat up slowly, her head still pounding from yesterday's heat stroke, and looked around the modest living room. Everything was clean but simple. IKEA furniture, family photos on the walls, a small TV. Nothing ostentatious or pretentious, just a working man's home that radiated warmth and comfort. The contrast to her own immaculate cold house was stark. "Good morning," Elena said, emerging from the kitchen with a glass of electrolyte solution. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Karen admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. Through the sliding glass door, she could see Marcus in the pool with 3 neighborhood children, teaching them how to tread water. His patient, gentle manner with the kids made something twist in her chest. "He's been up since 6, Elena continued, making sure everyone has what they need. The Johnsons' baby was running a fever from the heat, so Marcus drove them to the emergency clinic at 5 this morning." Karen felt a stab of shame. The Johnsons lived 2 houses down from her, and she'd never even learned their baby's name. Marcus had been in the neighborhood 6 months and was already more connected to these people than she'd been in 5 years. "I should go home," Karen said weakly, though the thought of returning to her sweltering house filled her with dread. "Absolutely not," Elena replied firmly. "It's going to be even hotter today." "Marcus checked your house this morning. It's 98 degrees inside and climbing." The sliding door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, dripping wet from the pool. "How's the patient?" he asked Elena, but his eyes were on Karen with genuine concern. "Stubborn," Elena replied with a smile. "She wants to go home." "Karen, you nearly died yesterday," Marcus said, toweling off his hair. "Your house is uninhabitable. You're staying here until this heat breaks or until you get your AC fixed." The kindness in his voice made Karen want to cry again. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she whispered. "I've been horrible to you." Marcus sat down across from her, his expression serious. "My grandmother used to say that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Yesterday was yours. What you do next is up to you. Before Karen could respond, there was a knock at the door. Marcus opened it to find Patricia Mills and two other HOA board members, all looking sheepish and overheated. Marcus, Patricia began hesitantly, we wanted to apologize for the other night. We let Karen pressure us into something we knew was wrong. She glanced toward the living room where Karen sat, but continued. We also wanted to thank you. You've been amazing to everyone during this heat wave. The neighborhood's lucky to have you, added Jim Torres, another board member who'd voted against Marcus. We're calling an emergency meeting tonight to reverse those illegal bylaws and officially welcome your pool project. Marcus nodded graciously. I appreciate that. But honestly, I'm just glad everyone's staying safe. After they left, Karen sat in stunned silence. She'd spent months building alliances against Marcus, and now those same people were abandoning her to stand with him. The power structure she'd carefully constructed was crumbling, and she was watching it happen from his living room while he saved her life. The day progressed with a steady stream of neighbors seeking refuge. Marcus never turned anyone away. He'd set up multiple shade stations, kept a constant supply of cold drinks flowing, and even arranged for a grocery delivery to feed everyone who stayed. Karen watched it all from her spot on the couch, too weak to do more than observe. She saw Marcus help elderly Mrs. Chen into the pool when her arthritis flared up in the heat. She watched him patiently mediate a dispute between two children over pool toys. She observed him checking on everyone every few minutes, making sure no one showed signs of heat exhaustion. This was leadership, Karen realized. Not the authoritarian control she'd wielded through fear and manipulation, but genuine care and service to others. She'd been so focused on maintaining her position that she'd forgotten what leadership actually meant. Around 3 p.m., when the temperature hit 113 degrees, Karen's phone rang. The caller ID showed Whitmore HVAC Emergency Service. Ms. Whitmore, we had a cancellation. We can be there in an hour, but it'll be $800 just for the diagnostic, and parts will be extra. Are you interested? Karen looked at the number on her phone, then at Marcus, who was currently applying sunscreen to a toddler whose parents were both working and had nowhere else to leave him. Actually, Karen said slowly, I need to ask you something first. How many calls do you have backed up? At least 40 families, ma'am. This heat's got everyone desperate. Karen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would define who she chose to be going forward. I want you to take those 40 families first. Start with the ones who have elderly people or small children. Ma'am, you're sure? We might not get back to you for a week. I'm sure, Karen said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. Take care of the people who need it most. Marcus had overheard the conversation. When she hung up, he stared at her with something like amazement. Karen, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she replied quietly. I have somewhere safe to stay. They don't. That evening, as the HOA board officially voted to rescind their illegal bylaws and formally apologize to Marcus, Karen found herself sitting by the pool's edge with her feet in the water. The temperature had finally dropped to a mere 105 degrees as the sun set, and the backyard was full of neighbors enjoying the relative coolness. Bill Henderson lowered himself into a chair beside her. Heard about what you did today, he said, giving up your repair slot. Karen nodded, watching Marcus flip burgers on a grill he'd set up to feed everyone. It was the right thing to do. Yes, it was, Bill agreed. Question is, what happens when this heat wave ends? When things go back to normal? Karen considered this. For 5 years, she'd ruled this neighborhood through fear and pettiness, convinced that maintaining control meant keeping others down. But watching Marcus over the past 2 days had shown her a different way. Leadership through service, strength through generosity, power through lifting others up. I don't think things can go back to normal, she said finally. I don't think I want them to. As if sensing her thoughts, Marcus approached with a plate of food. Figured you might be hungry, he said, offering her a burger and some fruit salad. Karen accepted the plate, but before Marcus could walk away, she caught his arm. Marcus, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. She took a deep breath. I was wrong about you from the beginning. Not just wrong, cruel, racist. I used every dirty trick I could think of to hurt you, and when you needed help the most, you saved my life." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "We all make mistakes." Karen. "This wasn't a mistake," she said firmly. "This was a choice, a series of terrible choices, and I need to make better ones going forward." Around them, the neighborhood Karen had once terrorized was experiencing something new: genuine community. Children played safely while their parents relaxed and connected with neighbors they'd barely known before. Elderly residents found companionship and care. Families shared food and stories and laughter. And at the center of it all was the pool she'd tried so hard to destroy, the symbol of everything she'd thought was wrong with Marcus, now revealed as everything that was right about him. The heatwave would continue for 3 more days, but Karen's real education was just beginning. 3 weeks later, the temperature had returned to a bearable 85 degrees, and life in Willowbrook Estates had settled into a new rhythm. Karen's air conditioning had been repaired 10 days earlier, but she found herself spending most afternoons, at Marcus's pool anyway, not as a desperate refugee, but as a welcome neighbor. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first few days after the heatwave broke, Karen had struggled with old habits. She'd caught herself starting to criticize a neighbor's garden choices, then stopped mid-sentence, remembering Marcus's patient example. She'd begun drafting a complaint about someone's garbage cans, then deleted it and walked over to offer help instead. Today marked a special occasion, the neighborhood's first official pool party, organized not by Karen's iron-fisted HOA mandates, but by genuine community enthusiasm. Colorful banners stretched between trees, potluck tables groaned under homemade dishes, and the sound of children's laughter mixed with adult conversation and the gentle splash of water. "Karen, you made it!" Patricia Mills called out, waving from beside the pool. "Did you bring the potato salad?" "2 kinds," Karen replied, holding up containers, regular and German style. The simple act of contributing food to a community, gathering rather than controlling every detail of it, still felt foreign, but increasingly natural. Marcus emerged from the house carrying a cooler of drinks, Elena beside him with a tray of her famous empanadas. They'd become the unofficial hosts of these gatherings, though they insisted everyone was equally responsible for making them happen. "How's the new job going?" Elena asked Karen as she set down the potato salad. Karen smiled, a genuine expression that had become more frequent lately. After resigning as HOA president in a formal letter of apology to the entire neighborhood, she'd taken a position as a patient advocate at Elena's hospital. The work was humbling, helping people navigate insurance and medical bureaucracy, but it felt meaningful in ways her previous corporate consulting never had. "Challenging," Karen admitted. "Yesterday, I helped a family get coverage for their daughter's surgery. Took 6 hours of phone calls, but when they called to thank me..." She trailed off, still amazed by how good it felt to help rather than hinder. "That's what it's all about," Marcus said, overhearing as he arranged chairs in the shade. "Making things better for people instead of making things harder." The gentle reproach wasn't lost on Karen, but it no longer stung. It simply reminded her how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. "Marcus!" 8-year-old Tommy Henderson came running over, dripping wet from the pool. "Will you teach me that diving trick again?" "Sure thing, buddy," Marcus replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Let me just help Ms. Whitmore with these chairs first." "I can help too," Tommy declared, grabbing a chair with both hands. Karen watched the interaction with a warmth she was still learning to recognize. This was what she'd been fighting against all those months ago. Not Marcus himself, but the kind of community he represented. One where leadership came from service, where success was measured by how much you lifted others up, where belonging wasn't earned through exclusion, but through inclusion. "Karen!" Bill Henderson approached with a manila folder, grinning broadly. "I have something for you." Inside the folder was a framed certificate. Willowbrook Estates Volunteer of the Month, for outstanding service to community members in need. Below it was a photo from the heatwave, Karen helping Mrs. Chen into the pool while Marcus steadied them both. "The new HOA board voted unanimously," Bill explained. "Your work coordinating cooling centers and checking on elderly residents during the heat wave was exceptional. Karen stared at the certificate, remembering how desperately she'd once craved recognition and control. This acknowledgement felt different, earned through service rather than manipulation, celebrating contribution rather than domination. "I don't deserve this," she said quietly. "Maybe not 3 weeks ago," Marcus said, joining the conversation. "But you do now. You've shown what real leadership looks like." As the afternoon progressed, Karen found herself observing the neighborhood she'd once ruled with an iron fist. Children of different ethnicities played together without anyone monitoring their interactions for appropriateness. Families shared food and stories across cultural and economic lines. Elderly residents received genuine care and attention rather than perfunctory HOA compliance checks. This was what Marcus had been trying to build all along, not just a pool, but a community. And in her desperate attempts to stop him, she'd nearly destroyed something beautiful before it could grow. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elena settled into the chair beside her, taking a break from the festivities. "I was just thinking about how wrong I was," Karen said. "About Marcus, about this neighborhood, about what leadership means." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Marcus told me something once that stuck with me. He said the measure of a person isn't their worst moment. It's what they do after they recognize their worst moment." "And what have I done?" Karen asked. "You've changed," Elena said simply. "Not just apologized, not just said you were sorry, but actually changed. That's rare, Karen. Most people just dig in deeper when confronted with their mistakes." As evening approached and the party began winding down, Karen found herself alone with Marcus as they cleaned up. The other neighbors had gone home to their own families, their own routines, but the sense of community lingered in the warm evening air. "Marcus," Karen said, stacking empty plates, "I need to ask you something. That first day when you caught me with the complaint, when I said those terrible things about you not deserving this place, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you report me to the city or get me kicked off the HOA board?" Marcus considered the question while folding chairs. "Because fighting back would have made me like you," he said finally. "And I didn't want to be like the person you were then. I wanted to be the person I hoped you could become." The simple truth of it took Karen's breath away. While she'd been plotting his destruction, he'd been hoping for her redemption. While she'd been trying to tear down his dream, he'd been building something that included even her. "I'm not sure I deserve that kind of faith," she said. "None of us deserve grace," Marcus replied. "That's what makes it grace." As they finished cleaning up, Karen looked around the backyard that had become the heart of their community. The pool reflected the evening sky, its surface calm and inviting. Toys floated peacefully on the water, evidence of the day's joy. Strings of lights Marcus had hung for the party twinkled like stars. "You know what the real irony is?" Karen said. "I spent months trying to prove you didn't belong here, and the whole time, I was the one who didn't belong. Not because of my race or my money or my house, but because of my heart. You had to teach me how to be a neighbor." Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that came from genuine satisfaction rather than triumph. "The beautiful thing about belonging is that it's not about deserving it. It's about choosing it. Every day we choose to be part of something bigger than ourselves, or we choose to stand apart. You're choosing differently now." As Karen walked back to her house that evening, her perfectly climate-controlled, impeccably decorated house that no longer felt like a fortress, she paused at her front door and looked back across the street. Marcus was turning off the pool, lights, Elena was locking up the house, and their backyard was returning to quiet normalcy. But the transformation was permanent. The neighborhood that had once been divided by fear and petty regulations was now united by genuine care and shared purpose. The pool that she'd tried so desperately to destroy had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose community over control, service over superiority, love over hate. Karen Whitmore had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power came not from keeping others down, but from lifting them up. And in learning that lesson, she'd discovered something she'd been searching for all her life without realizing it. She'd found her way home. The pool parties would continue every few weeks, growing into a beloved neighborhood tradition. Children would learn to swim in those same waters where Karen had once nearly collapsed from heat stroke. Families would celebrate birthdays and holidays around the deck where she'd first learned what real leadership looked like. And every time Karen looked out her window at Marcus's backyard, she would remember the day she discovered that the most beautiful revenge is not getting even. It's choosing to be better.